That is a picture of Jerusalem at a distance. Told you this morning where we were going, but I want to ask this question first. What is the most Jewish thing a Jew can do? The reason I asked that question is there was an advertisement between songs on YouTube one day, and I was listening, and a Jewish man asked that question. He said, what is the most Jewish thing a Jew can do? And when he gave his answer, I amened him. Because his answer is, believe in Jesus. And then he began to reason, and it makes perfect sense. Jesus is their Messiah. He was prophesied by their prophets. He came through the exact line that they were expecting him to come through. He's the descendant of Abraham. He's the descendant of David. He was the one that was destined to rule an eternal kingdom of God's people. And the gospel was first declared to them. When Jesus sent out a limited commission, it went to them. When the apostles started, they went from Jerusalem to Judea and then began to spread out. Every time they're going into a city, they're going to the Jews first. God is doing everything He can for what had been His covenant people to bring them to Christ. The most Jewish thing a Jew could do today is believe in Jesus. Still, they rejected Him. Still, they abused Him, and ultimately they killed Him. They rejected the chief cornerstone, and when they did, it was the final nail in their coffin as God's covenant people and as a nation. So the gospel is delivered to the Gentiles. Jerusalem is leveled in AD 70. Israel lost her position. God's kingdom went from being a physical kingdom following a particular bloodline to a spiritual kingdom through the blood of Christ, through the church. All records of the priesthood were destroyed. They can no longer trace from the line of Aaron. They can no longer have a high priest. And this is something that He had warned them about before they even entered Canaan. Remember what He told them. He said, number one, I am not giving you this land because of you. I am giving you this land for two reasons. Number one, for me. Number two, I'm giving it to you because the Canaanites are so evil. After you run them out, and He went ahead and prophesied, and you go after their gods, and you become like them, when you become unfaithful, I'm going to do the exact same thing to you. Therefore, to the question that I was told you I was going to address this morning, after they were disinherited, they lost all claim to Jerusalem and the land of Palestine based on a religious argument. Cultural argument? Maybe. But they lost all rights to argue that they are God's chosen people and that is the land that He gave them. They also lost any claim that they are God's chosen people. Why is this important? Because today, the war in Jerusalem has led to all kinds of speculation. It has led to all kinds of rumor, misinterpretation of prophecy, and even a little bit of panic. So I'm going to reveal the answer up front, then we're going to go to the evidence. because they were disinherited, because God established the new covenant, whether Jerusalem stands or falls has no bearing on the end of our world. If Jerusalem falls today, the world is not going to end tomorrow. And it is not going to usher in a series of events that we can identify that will tell us when the end of the world is going to come. Yes, war is awful. As Hawkeye said in MASH, if you put war and hell side by side, in some ways war is worse. Because in hell there are no innocent bystanders. In war, there are innocent bystanders. Children die. Those that are not connected to the war itself die. So in that sense, war is even worse. Let me give you a side note about this war. Those of you who remember, I'm of Syrian descent. I ended up in this country because my great-grandmother came here because of the war in the Middle East. War will always exist in the Middle East. It has existed since the beginning of time. They fight. That's what they do. They fight over land. They fight over religious beliefs. They fight over absolutely anything. It's not going to stop tomorrow. If the United States intervenes and brings this one to a halt, there will be another one next week. Is it awful? Absolutely. Every life lost outside of Christ is a lost soul. That's terrible. That's heartbreaking. Kind of back to where we were this morning. Puts the onus on us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. But hear me again. If Jerusalem falls, it will not signal the end of time. And here's why. It's in Matthew chapter 24. It is the primary text used by those who feel Jerusalem's fate determines the world's fate. It's also the primary text used by those who declare that we can see the end of time coming by certain signs. And so we're going to go there, and we're going to go all the way through the chapter, and we're going to let Jesus answer this. So let's learn things. And if you've never seen NCIS New Orleans, that is Dwayne Pride, the leader of the investigative team. That's his line. Go learn things. And it's a line that we need. We have to go to the book and learn things so that we have the answers. So what's the context? Verse 1. And Jesus came out from the temple and was going away when his disciples came up to point out the temple buildings to him. Now then, I don't know why. It's not like it's the first time any of them have seen it. It dominates their view every time they come to Jerusalem. Every time Jesus comes, he's going there. He's teaching there. But for whatever reason, this day, they are enamored with the Temple Mount. Not just the temple proper. It's the whole Temple Mount. It's all the courts and the porticos and everything. And so Jesus makes an observation in reference to that Temple Mount and a prophecy in verse 2. Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here shall be left upon another, which will not be torn down. So Jesus is telling them that there is a time coming when someone or something is going to level the Temple Mount. All you're going to have left is the mountain itself and a piece of a wall. So the disciples ask a question in verse 3. Okay, Jesus, you're telling us this, so when we get to the Mount of Olives, we want more details. Tell us, when will these things be? Oh, here's the first key. They ask a second question too. And what will be the sign of your coming at the end of the age? So everything that's going to go on in this discussion is going to answer one of two questions. We have to be able to distinguish between the two. That's where the confusion comes from in our world, because they make no distinction between the two questions. Since he does not say to them, let me answer the second question first, we can establish that he's going to answer them in the same order that he asks, or they ask the questions. So, which was what order? Number one, you just told us in verse 2 that this Temple Mount's going to be leveled. When? So he deals with that subject first. So when he begins speaking in verse 4, he is addressing the fall of Jerusalem. In answer to that question, and that question only, he said, number one, verses 4 through 7, there are going to be all kinds of trials and tribulations before you get to that point. Those things are just the beginning, but you're going to be able to identify between now and the moment that hits that there are things going on. But it's also going to include a lot of rumors. It's going to include a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding of the things that are happening. But I am warning you ahead of time that you're going to know, in some sense, when Jerusalem is going to fall. Before that happens, verse 9, they will deliver you. When do they begin delivering the ones he's addressing? In the book of Acts. The Jews come after them. The Romans come after them. James, who is standing there in this crowd, is going to die within the book of Acts. Who is the you? It's the disciples. So we have a context for the fall of Jerusalem. The lifetime of the apostles. Shortly after, other things are happening, which includes their persecution. Verses 10 through 13, then things are going to get worse. People are going to get even farther out there. There's not going to be any love among humanity when it comes to what's outside of the body of Christ. People are going to keep going further and further astray, so you stick it out. You survive with your faith intact when everything that you know and understand collapses around you physically. And it begins to affect you personally. Verse 14. Again, a time frame. Watch this. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world for a witness to all the nations. Then the end shall come. So the gospel is going to go into all the world before the end of what? It cannot refer to anything other than the discussion. It's the end of everything they hold dear. Back in verse 2. Oh, Jesus, look at this Temple Mount. It is beautiful. We are on top of the world. That's going to come to an end, and it's going to come to an end shortly after the time that the gospel goes into all the world. When did that end come? AD 70. When had the gospel reached the whole world? Use this Wednesday night, Colossians chapter 1 and verse 23. The book of Colossians is written somewhere around AD 60 or 61. And Paul says the gospel has been proclaimed all the way across the world. So we have a time frame. The lifetime of the apostles, the gospel going. By the way, notice I'm doing the same thing we do when we explain the establishment of the church in Jerusalem. We look at time frames, we look at the lifetime of the apostles, we talk about Matthew chapter 16, and it's going to come before they die. Same thing, same process. Verse 15, therefore, when you see it, again, you who? You the disciples, when you see the Romans besieging Jerusalem, When you know that everything you hold dear is about to fall, what does he say? He says, run for the hills. If he's talking about the end of time, what good is it going to do for me to run into the mountains? Peter said everything will be consumed by fire when he comes back. There's not going to be a safe place. He is not talking about the end of time. So when you see Rome marching on Jerusalem, you better bail. If you're even in the area surrounding Jerusalem, if you're anywhere in Judea, you better run. Why? Because God is absolutely furious with Israel. God is making a point. I sent my son, you killed him. This is over for you. I'm going to wipe you out. Verse 17 through 20. Let him who's on the housetop not go down to get anything. Let him in the field not return. Please pray that this doesn't happen when you have a child, or that doesn't happen in winter or on the Sabbath. It's going to be immediate. You're talking about the most powerful army on the face of the earth in their day collapsing on Jerusalem and Judea. So he said, you better run and you better not hesitate. Get out of town. Because verse 21, it's going to be worse than anything you've ever imagined. It's going to be worse than anything you've ever experienced. It's going to be worse than anything that's ever going to be experienced. Verses 22 through 28, when you do that, when you escape to the hills, do not believe the rumors of a rescuer. I'm not coming back to bail out Israel. There's not going to be a Messiah that's going to lead you in revolt against Rome, that you can push them back out and save this Temple Mount and everything dear and precious to you. Now notice this. He said, vultures will gather when the bodies start dropping. That's exactly what goes on in our world. When a war breaks out in the Middle East, the vultures circle. And they use it to mislead, to take advantage of. They love war. They live off the death and the decay. So he said, look, they're going to come out of the woodworks when Jerusalem falls. And they're going to have all kinds of crazy stories that I'm over there or I'm over there. I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to rescue Jerusalem. Then verses 29 through 35, he said, but it's going to get better after that. It does for the church in some ways, because Jerusalem, the Judea, the Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they get off the Christians' back for a while. Now Rome's going to pick up the slack, but these guys get a little reprieve. Verse 34, now watch this. He says all of this, so everything from where he started talking in verse 4 down to this point, he said will happen before this generation ends. Same type idea we use in Matthew 26 and verse 28, the coming of the kingdom. It's going to happen within the timeline of these guys. If he is talking about the end of the world, somewhere there is a really old apostle in a motorized wheelchair tootling around waiting on the end of the world. But you see, John, the last one to die, dies of natural causes after being boiled alive, after being exiled, and then coming back from the Isle of Patmos, somewhere around 96, 97, 98 AD. Is he talking about the end of the world? Doesn't fit. And it's not hard to see that when you read it. Now, here's the next key. First key was what? He's answering two questions. The second key. We still have to answer a second question, Jesus. So watch this. Second question, what will be the sign of your coming, the end of the age? Verse 36. But, he's changing subjects. But, let me go back and pick up on number 2. But on that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. The coming of the Son of Man will be just like in the days of Noah. In those days, before the flood, they're eating and drinking, they're marrying, they're giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they did not understand until it came. So will the coming of the Son of Man be. 2 in the field, 2 at the grinding mill. Be on the alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. So he changes subjects, but let me tell you the other part of it. Jesus says, he says, as for your second question, no one will know. He said, I don't even know. Now, be rational. Be rational world. He has been talking about signs and warnings for 32 verses. And now he's saying no signs. If his coming is unidentifiable, he cannot, in those first 32 verses, be talking about his return, because we would be able to identify it. We would have a warning. And I love this. It's my favorite part of this whole discussion. Anytime I have this discussion with someone who wants to talk about this being the end of time, here at the end of, or in Matthew 24. If he does not know when it will be, somebody please explain to me how he can give me a sign. He said, only the Father knows. So when the end of time comes, the Father's going to look at the Son and say, it's now. And the Son will have had no idea that it was now until the Father said it. How can he give us a sign? So the rest of the chapter is just be ready. Jerusalem's going to fall? Absolutely. You can know when it's going to be, and you better run for the hills. When I'm coming back, there's no possible way to know. There's nowhere to escape. Be ready. So in short, there is absolutely, to answer the question I was asked, there is no connection between the war in Jerusalem today and the end of time. We will not have advance warning that Christ is going to come back. It could be after a war. It could be after a rumor of war. It could be after an earthquake. It could be right now. It will be when the Father's cup is full and His patience has run out. 2 Peter chapter 3. Why has He not come back? Because He's patient and He's long-suffering. What does that mean? He's going to come back when He's no longer patient. When He's looked at this world, and it's got nothing to do with Jerusalem, but when He's looked at the evil in this world and the patience runs out. Do not let world events drive you into a panic. Do not let them to lead you to start looking for signs and symbols that Jesus said we cannot know. Just be ready whenever it comes. Through obedience to the gospel, through walking in the light as He is in the light. If I'm in the light, it doesn't matter when He comes back, because the blood of His Son will continually cleanse me. If you're outside of that tonight, please don't wait, because no one can tell you when He's coming back. You need to be ready as we stand and sing.